Welcome. I'm going to invite you to come in and grab a seat. We are glad you're here, and we're going to get going for an exciting night. My name is Dan Carlton. I'm the pastor of Culpeper Baptist Church.
I'm Danny Soderholm. I'm the bishop of the Piedmont Ward, which is half of Culpeper, Orange, and Madison counties.
And my name is Imam Shams Rahmani. I'm the Imam at the Islamic Center of Culpeper, here in Culpeper. And I welcome all of you with the traditional greeting of Muslims. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, mercy, and blessings be upon all of you.
And the three of us know each other, and we like each other, and we hang out together, okay? And we hope some of that will happen around this room tonight as we share some great presentations. So we're going to have 3 keynote speakers, then we're going to do some panel things, and then we're going to invite you to join us for a reception. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker tonight as these two leave the stage. Dr. Eric Smith is with us tonight. He is the pastor of Sharon Baptist Church in Savannah, Tennessee. He has written the biography on John Leland, and we want to help you understand the importance of Culpeper in the story of religious liberty in our nation. So we were thrilled when Dr. Smith was willing to come and share with us tonight. His wife Candace is with them, and would you just welcome him to the stage?
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here tonight. Very excited to join you. We've received such warm hospitality in the community of Culpeper, and this is a beautiful place, and it's been a delight to visit with you. In the year 1769, the Baptist James Ireland received fair warning. If he were to preach in the town of Culpeper, he would be fined and perhaps even imprisoned. Now, Ireland said, I sat down and counted the cost. Freedom or confinement, liberty or prison. But, he said, having ventured all upon Christ, I determined to suffer all upon him. And sure enough, when Ireland finished his outdoor sermon, he heard a rustling in the bushes and out stepped the sheriff who was there to lead Ireland to the Culpeper jail. A considerable parade of people trailed us, Ireland wrote, hurling oaths and abuse all the way. In the following weeks, Ireland would preach to many visitors through a small iron grate in his cell from that jail. But these sessions were often disrupted, violently so. Men from the town of Culpeper, y'all weren't quite as sophisticated back then as you are now, I'm sure, but men from town would ride through the congregants on their horses and threaten the listeners with clubs. One man stood at that iron grate where Ireland was preaching and urinated on him as he spoke. A group of rowdies tried to smoke Ireland out by burning what they called Indian pepper at that iron grate and filling his cell with smoke. Another group even devised a kind of bomb out of gunpowder and tried to blow him up and set off an explosion outside the cell. And yet still, James Ireland preached on. He claimed to, quote, enjoy much of the divine presence from his Culpeper confinement and began signing his letters from my palace in Culpeper. You may know that Virginians like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson played a critical role in enshrining religious freedom at our nation's founding 250 years ago. What you may not be as familiar with is the fact that many Baptists, just like James Ireland, also played an active part in this story. Some of them played that part even right here in Culpeper. Now, religious freedom was a novel idea in the middle of the 18th century. Most of the world at that time still assumed that the state had a responsibility to establish a particular brand of religion because they believed, logically, that having one established religion would form the population into a unified, moral, and orderly citizenship. And in the colony of Virginia, as it was at that time, the Church of England was that established church. Now, Virginia law then required its citizens to support the Church of England by its attendance at the services and, most importantly, by its tax dollars, which paid for those ministers and those Anglican meeting houses all over the colony of Virginia. Now, some other groups could function in the colony of Virginia, but they were considered to be dissenters or nonconformist. And these dissenting groups had a certain measure of freedom in Virginia, but they did have to apply to the government for special certificates. They had to receive permission to do a number of different things, to function in public. They had to submit to all kinds of restrictions. They were certainly socially marginalized, and they still had to pay for that Anglican church. Now, this arrangement worked in Virginia until the mid-1750s when those troublemaking Baptists showed up. Typically, these Baptist ministers were untrained men who had nevertheless had a powerful personal experience with Jesus Christ. And they also believed that God himself had called them to preach the good news about Jesus Christ all over Virginia. And so they did, without sanction from the colonial government. Often these Baptists were delivering their messages in private homes or out in the open air. Their messages were characteristically plain-spoken, direct, passionate, calling ordinary people from all levels of society, including slaves and Native Americans, calling all citizens from all levels of society into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. And they called them to show their commitment to Jesus through what was then a very exotic ritual in Virginia, the public immersion of a disciple in water, which they called baptism. Virginians had never seen anything like that. They would always draw a crowd. And the Baptist message really connected in Virginia, particularly in the backcountry and particularly among the middle and lower classes who felt sort of disenfranchised and disconnected from the Anglican establishment. And Baptists began to grow explosively in colonial Virginia. And this was very threatening to the existing authorities. So was the Baptist disregard for all of those religious policies about applying for certificates to preach and to assemble and so forth. But Baptists believed that since Jesus himself had commissioned them to preach and to practice their faith, they needed no further government permission from human beings to do so. And so in the 1760s, just like in Star Wars, the empire struck back. Examples abound of persecutions that Virginia Baptists suffered from 1760 to 1775. You've heard a little bit about that already. Hecklers would toss snakes and hornets' nests into meetings. Now, that might reduce your attendance a little bit, Pastor Dan. Officials would interrupt services by riding horses through the crowd or releasing packs of dogs on the singers. Mobs would beat up worshipers and would half drown them in Culpeper's streams and rivers as a mockery of the ritual of baptism. Samuel Harris, a Baptist preacher known as the Apostle of Virginia, was preaching in Orange County when a man dragged him down from the pulpit and, quote, hauled him about, sometimes by the hand, sometimes by the leg, and sometimes by the hair of his head. 34 Baptist preachers, like James Ireland, were jailed during this period, remarkably including 11 right here in Culpeper. And if you would like to learn more about that, there's a wonderful display honoring these Baptist preachers from the colonial period at Culpeper Baptist Church right now. Well, these actions got the attention of a young James Madison, who was deeply disturbed by what he was witnessing. And in 1774, Madison wrote a remarkable letter to a friend in which he complained of, quote, that diabolical, hell-conceived principle of persecution. Madison said that this religious persecution, quote, vexes me the most of anything whatever. There are at this time, he said, in the adjacent county, no less than 5 or 6 well-meaning men in close jail for publishing their religious sentiments, which in the main are very orthodox. Madison said that he had tried on several occasions to argue against this religious persecution, but to no avail. So he asked his friend to pray for him and to, quote, pray for liberty of conscience to revive among us. Now, this is an important part of the story because neither James Madison nor his friend Thomas Jefferson shared the evangelical faith of those Baptists who were being persecuted. But Madison and Jefferson believed that the rights of conscience of all people were sacred, and that governments did not have the right to punish people for their personal religious beliefs. And during the Revolutionary years, these politicians would partner with those preachers to form new policies of freedom in Virginia and far beyond, with effects far beyond. So by 1776, Virginia Baptists had continued to grow in spite of that heavy persecution they were enduring in Virginia. And with war with Great Britain looming, suddenly those colonial leaders are realizing they're going to need all the help that they can get, including all of the military support of these Baptists and the other dissenters who are flourishing in Virginia. All of a sudden, they're kind of regretting throwing them in jail and realizing they need to cozy up to them a little bit more. So in a remarkable turn of events, Virginia's dissenters began to shrewdly barter with colonial leaders, offering their support militarily for the revolution for greater and greater measures of religious freedom in return. There's a wonderful book written about this by a UVA professor named John Ragasta called Wellspring of Liberty. If you're interested in pursuing this further, Wellspring of Liberty by John Ragasta is a great book. Well, at the same time that Baptists are working their end of the situation, Madison is doing his work to enshrine religious freedom in the new Virginia state constitution that's being composed. Now, at first, Madison's colleagues recommended that dissenters in Virginia should enjoy toleration to practice their religion under the new government. And that sounded really good to most of Madison's peers. But Madison vigorously objected to this language of toleration, because this wording of toleration, it suggested that the right to worship according to one's conscience was a favor that the state had the power either to grant or to withhold. Whereas Madison argued that this was an inalienable right endowed to all people by God himself. The state's responsibility was simply to recognize that right given by God. Well, it took some doing, but when Madison and Jefferson passed the Religious Freedom Bill of 1779, they'd done something amazing. They had disestablished the Anglican Church in Virginia, and they declared that, quote, all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience. They'd come a long way from toleration. They'd come a long way from James Ireland in Culpeper jail. Now, you may be aware of this, but that 1779 Religious Freedom Bill, that's one of 3 achievements that Thomas Jefferson has listed on his tombstone at Monticello. Authoring the Declaration of Independence, founding the University of Virginia, and this Religious Freedom Bill. It eclipsed being the 3rd president of the United States in Jefferson's estimation. Well, Virginia Baptists celebrated this new Religious Freedom Bill, but they still had more history to make. In the spring of 1788, so now we're fast forwarding. The revolution's over, it's been won, and now the nation is being formed around a new federal constitution. So 1788, James Madison is now seeking election as a delegate to Virginia's ratifying constitution. All the new states have to ratify this new federal constitution, of which Madison was the chief author. Now, Madison assumed that he would easily be elected by Virginians after all that he had done during the Revolutionary years. As a matter of fact, Madison was so confident that he would be elected that he wasn't planning to come home from New York back to Virginia for the election. He wasn't going to campaign. He wasn't going to shake hands. He wasn't going to kiss babies. He was going to stay in New York riding and hanging out with Alexander Hamilton because he was so sure that those Virginia Baptists would back him and would support him. But he grossly miscalculated. And that's because Madison's federal constitution, for all of its strengths, it had failed to make explicit provision for the freedom of conscience and the right to worship. It was never explicitly stated in there. And Baptists said, we've been down this road before. We don't want our religious freedoms to be simply assumed. That's when bad things happen. So we're not voting for this federal constitution. They were going to vote instead for James Madison's anti-federalist opponent, which means that ratification was going to be defeated in Virginia and the Constitution was never going to get off the ground. Well, Madison learns about all of this from a remarkable series of letters from a friend back home in Virginia, and he is horrified. And his friend says, the only thing I can tell you to do is get down to Virginia as quick as you can and start talking to some Baptists. And he particularly tells him to look for a Baptist leader named John Leland. John Leland had become an important leader among Baptists in this part of Virginia. He at one time was pastor of the Mount Pony Church, which is now the Culpeper Baptist Church, and was kind of an at-large preacher and evangelist at that time, very influential. And as the story goes, Madison and Leland have this epic meeting in which they exchange ideas, and Leland tells Madison that the Baptists are not going to support them without explicit provision for freedom of conscience. And so Madison, before the sun sets that day, tells Leland that if the Baptists will vote him to the ratification convention, that he will see to it that a Bill of Rights, which included a religious freedom amendment, would be attached to the Constitution. Leland took him at his word. The Baptists swung their votes over to Madison, and the rest is history. And that's how the Baptists, boys and girls, gave you the Bill of Rights. You're welcome. Typical Baptist bluster. There's probably more to the story than that, but that is a very important part of the story. And a monument to this meeting between Madison and Leland stands in Orange, Virginia to this day. You can go see it for yourself. Well, what you need to know about John Leland is he would then take everything that he'd learned during his 15 years in Virginia from Madison and Jefferson, and he would take it to the religious freedom fight back in his native New England. Now, New England would maintain an establishment of religion. It was the Congregational Church up there. And New England would keep its established religion long after America's founding, making life very difficult for Baptists and other dissenters there. And so Leland began to write editorials and make speeches, and he would campaign, this Baptist preacher. And he declared that the government's toleration of religious diversity, it may sound humane and benevolent, but it has a deadly root. He's echoing Madison here. For, Leland said, if the government has power to grant it as a favor, it has equal power to withhold it. In such cases, says Leland, citizens enjoy their liberty by a tenure no better than the goodwill of those who are in power. So you're safe as long as the person in power agrees with you, but if you get someone else in power, all of a sudden you're in trouble. That's where toleration will get you. You need full religious freedom. Now, Madison and Jefferson, of course, rooted this idea of religious freedom in Enlightenment principles learned from philosophers like John Locke. Leland affirmed this, but he also saw religious freedom as a very biblical idea, rooted in principles like the distinction between the church and the state under the new covenant of Jesus Christ. He saw it in the principle of how the gospel alone has the power to change the human heart apart from political coercion. He saw it in the principle that a personal supernatural conversion was necessary for the sinner to be made right with God, not simply being born into a state church. And perhaps above all, Leland saw this biblical principle of every individual's accountability to stand before God on the day of judgment. Because of this, Leland said, if the government can answer for individuals at the day of judgment, then let men be controlled by it in religious matters. Otherwise, let men be free. All people should be allowed to prepare for that ultimate encounter with God according to their own conscience. Well, with an unusual consistency of thought for his day, Leland demanded that religious freedom should apply to all people, not just all Baptists, not just all Protestants, but also to deists, to Roman Catholics, to Muslims, and even to atheists. Let every man speak freely without fear, Leland said. Maintain the principles that he believes, worship according to his own faith, either one God, 3 gods, no God, or 20 gods, and let government protect him in so doing. Instead of discouraging him with prescriptions, fines, confiscations, or death, let him be encouraged as a free man to bring forth his arguments and maintain his points with all boldness. Then, if his doctrine is false, it will be confuted. And if it is true, though ever so novel, let others credit it. When every man has this liberty, what can he wish for more? Now, to be very clear, as a Baptist evangelist, Leland wished to persuade all men and women to follow Jesus Christ. For more than 65 years, he plied his trade as an evangelist with remarkable industry. He preached more than 8,000 sermons, baptized more than 1,500 people, traveled a total distance that he claimed would, quote, girdle the globe 4 times. It's a long way on horseback. But Leland also believed, as passionate as he was about evangelism, he also believed that enlisting government assistance was not the way to make genuine Christians. He believed this belittled the power of the gospel. It violated the sacred rights of conscience possessed by all people, and it corrupted true faith into a worthless nominal Christianity in name only. And these fundamental convictions drove Leland to tirelessly advocate for religious disestablishment in the early 19th century, and he lived to celebrate its achievement in the state of Connecticut in 1818 and in the state of Massachusetts finally in 1833. Well, one more story, and then we're done. Leland's love of liberty inspired him to deliver one of the most legendary presidential gifts in American history. On New Year's Day, 1802, Leland arrived at the White House to present President Thomas Jefferson with a gigantic wheel of cheese. It was 13 feet in circumference and weighed 1,235 pounds. That's a lot of cheese. A paper sign draped over the red crust of that cheese, declaring it to be, quote, the greatest cheese in America for the greatest man in America. Leland had escorted that cheese by sled and then by wagon all the way down the Atlantic coast from Cheshire, Massachusetts, where a small community of dairy farming, freedom-loving Baptists were exultant over Jefferson's recent election and all he had done to preserve religious freedom. Leland and the cheese had attracted media attention all the way down. In fact, some hawkers in New York had offered him like $1,000 to rent out the cheese for a week for gawkers to come and look at, and he turned it down. But when he arrived at the White House, Jefferson met him on the front porch with arms flung wide in welcome. He then invited the longtime Virginia Baptist to preach before Congress on January 3rd, 1802, and he did. Now, the same day that Jefferson received the cheese, he also wrote the most famous words about church-state relations in American history. And he wrote those words to a group of Baptists, to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut. In this letter, Jefferson affirmed the Baptists' shared belief with him that, quote, religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God. Jefferson commended all the American people for prohibiting Congress from making any law, quote, respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Most famous words ever written about the church-state relations in America. Now, Jefferson's opponents would seize on this wall metaphor as proof that he was antagonistic towards all religious expression in American public life. And Jefferson's own personal motives with that metaphor have been debated by many historians. But as John Leland often pointed out, America under Jefferson, with religious freedom enshrined, did not become a secular wasteland. To the contrary, it experienced massive revival under what we now know as the Second Great Awakening, which demonstrated once again that religion flourished if only left free. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. That was fantastic. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Alan Camp, known in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in this area as President Camp. Dr. Camp has a Ph.D. in atomic, molecular, there's one more, and optical physics. He works for the Parsons Group, working on projects for national security and defense. And I call him President Camp because he is also the stake president, so he's the ecclesiastical leader for the congregations in the Fredericksburg and Culpeper area. And there are about 3,000 Latter-day Saints in this area. He served in many different roles, whether it be teaching Sunday school to young people in primary, is what we call that, and also to teenagers, also serving for 5 years as the bishop in the Spotsylvania ward. And he lives in Spotsylvania with his wife, Christy, and his 6 children. 3 of his children and his wife, Christy, are here tonight. Dr. Camp.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have to say that I suspect that of our 3 keynote speakers, I am the low-energy intermission speaker tonight, so take that for what it's worth. I'm grateful to be here to join you tonight as we recognize Culpeper's unique role in the story of religious liberty here in this wonderful country. My goal is to share a little bit of perspective from the lens of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I want to talk a little bit about some historical context for our church, and then discuss, since my understanding is that the goal tonight is to talk not just about past history, but about present and future. I want to spend just a moment talking about perhaps our role here in this community, what responsibilities that we have in promoting religious freedom, especially now in this day and age. So let me start first by sharing a brief story. 30 years ago, when I was probably a little skinnier and I had a lot more hair, so just picture in your mind's eye I've got hair, right? I was serving as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, full-time missionary, self-paid for 2 years, sent to the other side of the world. I got to serve in Taiwan. I went there, so I grew up in Nebraska and was asked to serve in Taiwan, so a whole different culture, a very foreign experience for me. I had the beautiful opportunity and the privilege to work with the people there, to see life in a very different way than I had ever seen before. Growing up in Nebraska, I assumed, our family didn't have a lot of money, so I kind of assumed that I understood what it meant to be poor, until I went to Taiwan and I saw the people there and realized that I lived a life of luxury, a very different experience here in the United States. While serving there, we had the opportunity to do a lot of physical service to help communities and help individuals. We, of course, proselytized and shared our religious views with many that were there, looking for those who were interested in learning about Jesus Christ. As we did so, we often came across people who very much did not want to hear what we had to say. And I'm sure you've had this wonderful experience here in Culpeper as well, right? Where you see the missionaries, they're the ones with the black name tags on, white shirts, and they have this smile that you see. And you either want to be like, oh, I'm so excited to hear, why in the world are they so happy? Or you just want to like run them over with your car, right? They kind of instill this polar feeling. So here we are in Taiwan, and we had a lot of that same experience, a lot of people who did not necessarily want to hear what we had to share, and some people who did. We had the opportunity to meet with a gentleman, a relatively short gentleman. Of course, I guess as Americans, we were tall to many of the Taiwanese people, but a particularly short gentleman. He was interested in the message that we were sharing, and so we were excited. As we were meeting with this gentleman, though, we went through this process of sharing with him the things that we believed, and then we invited him to ponder over these things. We would share scriptures, we would pray together, and we invited him to ponder and to pray about the message that we shared so that he could gain a witness for himself. And we left, and we came back a few days later, and much to our surprise, he said, I've pondered, I've prayed over this, and guess what? I don't believe it. I don't agree with you. I don't think this is right. Now, as these energetic young missionaries, we were thinking, what do we do? That's not how it's supposed to work. And we talked to our wise mission leader, and I'll never forget what he emphasized for us. We said, what do we do? How do we help this gentleman? And his response to us was, you go back and you validate that experience that he had. You honor that. You recognize that he has done something. He is having a faith experience here. He is trying to learn for himself. You go back and honor that. And we went back, and that's exactly what we did. We commended him for this experience. We honored him, and we recognized at that point, at least me in my 30 years ago younger kid mind, I realized maybe for the first time that this was the important part of religious freedom. We're not going to agree. We're not going to see things the same way. But we need to honor each other's experiences. We need to recognize them. And even if I may have a different religious experience than you, we can still coexist. We can not only coexist, but find happiness together. So that was my experience there as a young missionary. As part of our faith, we have 13 statements, 13 articles of faith that help to define what we as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believe. All 13 of those statements begin with the phrase, "we believe," except for one of them. So, as an example, the very first one is probably not very controversial for anybody who is coming from a Christian background. That first statement, that first article is, "We believe in God, the eternal Father, and in his Son, Jesus Christ, and in the Holy Ghost." So again, all 13 of these statements begin with "we believe," and they lay out things that we believe, except for number 11. I want to read that one. It says, and you're probably going to hear some of the same language that Dr. Smith just read in connection with Madison and some of our founders of this country. This is the statement: "We claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men and women the same privilege. Let them worship how, where, or what they may." We claim the privilege. First of all, what privilege? We recognize that this is a privilege, right? Back then, in particular, but even now, this is a privilege that we have to worship God according to the dictates of our own conscience. There are plenty of places around the world where this privilege does not exist. We claim the privilege. So specifically, what privilege is that? I'm going to read it. Amendment 1, U.S. Constitution. "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." That's the privilege that we're claiming. We worship Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience. And where did that privilege come from? This is where we honor those actions of those Culpeper Baptist ministers 250 years ago. That sacrifice on our behalf of everybody here, whether you believe or not, whether you have faith or not, whether you tend towards religion or not. How important was it for those Baptist ministers to stand up for what they believed in? I'm not supposed to get emotional. I'm a physicist, right? I'm a scientist. I have no emotions. But I honor them, and I'm grateful for them, so that we have the opportunity to gather here together, right? Coming together of different faith, or maybe none at all, and having this opportunity to hear one another, to share our experiences, and to grow together as a community. I'm grateful to them. So looking back at the history that each of our religions have, I suspect that none of us here are strangers to persecution. Our Baptist friends, again, we've just heard of the terrible persecution that happened just 250 years ago. And it's not like it ended then for them or for any of the rest of us either. Our Muslim friends, who we'll get to hear from here in just a moment. I imagine that most of us here remember vividly those events on September 11th. And watching our country over the next many years, the persecution that was heaped upon those of our Muslim friends. Even to just relatively recently, right? I think it was 2016, our Muslim friends wanted to build a mosque here, and they met great resistance. No strangers to persecution. Well, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is no different. Many of you may be aware that the headquarters for the LDS Church is in Salt Lake City, Utah. You might not be aware that the founding of our church began around 1830 in upstate New York, far away from Utah. So how in the world did we get from here to there? Well, it's a story of persecution. Those early members of the church gathered in upstate New York. They then migrated to Pennsylvania, after which they migrated to Ohio, after which they migrated to Missouri, after which they migrated to Illinois, and then eventually on across the plains to Utah. Why was that? It's because every place that group tried to settle, they met with great resistance. And I could spend plenty of time talking about horror stories of what happened to them, although I think that Dr. Smith, his descriptions of some of those things that happened to those early Baptist ministers are very, very similar. Pain. Pain for those who simply wish to worship the way that they want to. And this is happening, well after the establishment of our Constitution. We haven't reached that more perfect union yet. Even today, we still meet resistance, right? All of us. We still find that there are pockets of persecution and pain. And again, this is part of why we gather here tonight, is to gain strength from one another, from this diversity of opinion, of thought, to learn more about each other, and to overcome some of this persecution that persists. So members of the church, as they migrated across, they met great stories of persecution. Many of them, as they would settle in an area, they would eventually run out. They had mobs that would come and attack them. Their homes were burned. In some cases, the lucky ones got to sell their property for pennies on the dollar, and they kept moving and they kept moving. Eventually, in the state of Missouri, the governor at the time, Governor Boggs, actually issued an extermination order. This is around 1838. That extermination order decreed that members of the church must be treated as enemies and, quote, exterminated or driven from the state. That's how bad it got. In fact, that particular law was on the books until 1976. So I guess 1975 you could still go and, torment the Mormons, and that was technically legal. Thank you for not doing that. We appreciate that. So we understand the importance of religious liberty. All of us here, I suspect, has our own story in some form recognizing the importance of religious liberty. In fact, tonight, the panels that we will have, we'll get to hear some of those stories of why this is important to us. And I look forward after this, as we gather, to hear some of your stories of understanding why religious liberty is important to you. And again, we honor those in our own past, our own faiths, and again, pointing back to these wonderful Baptist ministers who suffered on our behalf to ensure that these principles are present in our own Constitution. How beautiful is that? So let's change gears just slightly now. Let's talk about present and future. What can we do as members here in the Culpeper and surrounding communities? What can we do to better show our commitment to religious liberty? And again, not just for those of faith, for all people. Because as we commit to this idea of religious liberty, it protects all of us, regardless of what those beliefs are. So what can we do? I have 3 things I want to share. Number 1, and again, this comes from an LDS lens, so I'm going to share some quotes from some of the leaders of our church. Number 1, we live our values while valuing others' perspectives. In the LDS Church, we have an organization of women that is, I forgot how many. In a few minutes, Fallon Duff's going to be up here, and she'll tell you exactly how many women that organization incorporates. But there are thousands of women in our Relief Society organization, spread all around the world. The general president of the Relief Society, Jean B. Bingham, and this was several years ago, she listed several ways that we can have a positive impact in our communities. She said, and I quote, "Living with integrity at home and in the community, using a gentle voice and kind words with a challenging child or a difficult coworker, reaching out of your comfort zone to become acquainted with those who live around you," which again is what we're doing here tonight. "There are many simple actions we can do that will influence others to also rise to a higher plane." When we come in contact with those who are persecuting, whether it's in our face or whether it's online or however that might look, as we operate on higher principles, as we exercise those principles we teach in our religious communities, as we act like the Savior Jesus Christ, for example, we can have an impact in our own community. We can help overcome and rise our entire communities up to higher levels. And so that's the invitation, to live our values while valuing others' perspectives. And so how do we get to know others' perspectives? It's coming to meetings like this. It's interacting, right? Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and those who are here, I hope they'll forgive me for this, we tend to be just a little bit insular, right? Some of this is born from our persecution in the past. We tend to be just a little bit insular. And so as we gather in meetings like this, I'm gonna admonish the members of the LDS faith after this meeting to go, shake hands with the Baptists and talk to the Muslims and actually get out of our own little comfort zones here. This is how we build community. All right, number 2, and this one perhaps is a little bit harder. Stop listening to sources that perpetuate fear, anger, and hatred of others, particularly those that monetize hate. This is all around us, right? We are inundated with a culture where it's so easy to start up a blog, or you have your TikTok account or whatever it is, and you can say whatever you want. And often we have voices out there, and they tend to be loud voices that monetize hate. So we, as a community, can look to stop listening to those voices. Don't entertain those voices. Maybe that it means we have to stop clicking or sharing messages that are meant to divide. Maybe it's stopping our subscriptions to a podcast or watching a program that makes you angry. Have you ever noticed sometimes you'll watch these programs and you come away, you're angry, right? They get you riled up and you're angry at them, whoever the them is that they're talking about. Maybe it's simply laughing at a joke that's inappropriate or that denigrates another religion, right? Whether you are in high school, which I know high schools are beautiful, pristine places of higher education and learning. It's wonderful. Nothing bad ever happens in a high school. Or in your places of work, we often come across people who will denigrate others through joking. And again, an easy thing that we can do is simply stop perpetuating, stop entertaining, stop participating in this behavior that monetizes and projects hate. Now, I'm a scientist. Scientists love Venn diagrams, okay? You've seen the Venn diagrams, the big circles. Scientists will draw a big circle, and they'll put inside the circle something that goes together, right? A group of things, a set. We like to call it a set. So we'll put a set into a circle, and then we'll draw another circle with a different group of things, and then we look at how much these two things overlap, and then we talk about them a lot, and we get so excited. In fact, after this meeting, if you get me, over in the back and you start talking quantum mechanics, at some point I'm going to get excited, and I'm going to draw a Venn diagram for you, and it'll be great. I suspect that if we just drew the Venn diagram of overlap in some of the things that we hold dear to us, we might be surprised at the overlap. If we drew a Venn diagram that showed our views on community, how a community should be run, if we drew a Venn diagram showing our family values, if we draw a circle about how we believe we should be treated or how we should treat others, I suspect that if we even drew a diagram showing our political beliefs or our religious beliefs, all of those circles would greatly overlap, far more than perhaps we think right now, because of those loud voices that tell us, no, it's those slivers that don't overlap. That's the part we're going to amplify. That's the part we want you to focus on. But that's just not the way it is. We as a community, if we look at the things that we share together, the things we have in common are so much more and so much stronger than those things that we differ on. So again, we look for ways where we stop amplifying that hate, those edge things, and instead we focus together as a community on the things that we hold dear together. Our current president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, his name is Dallin H. Oaks. He happened to, his career, he served as a clerk for, I believe it was Earl Warren on the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Earl Warren. He also served as a state Supreme Court justice in Utah. So he's no slouch when it comes to the U.S. Constitution by any means. He shared a statement here in connection with this idea of avoiding hate. He said, "I encourage you to stand clear from the current atmosphere of hate and to refrain from participating in the contentious communications that are so common today. Followers of Christ should be examples of civility. But beyond this, we should remember and follow the Savior's teaching." And then he quotes John chapter 13, which probably most everybody is familiar with. "By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another." And this concept of love one another supersedes Christian belief, religious belief in general, right? I suspect that all of us, all of our community, all of humanity probably can easily get behind this idea that, gee, we should love one another. What a simple concept, simply showing love one to another. All right, last one, number 3. Learn to disagree without being disagreeable. Just because we often feel passionate, right? We get very passionate about whatever our belief is. If you ask me about quantum mechanics, I'm going to get really passionate, okay? Go ahead. Ask me a question about quantum mechanics. I'll get pretty passionate. But that doesn't mean we have to get angry. It doesn't mean we have to get disrespectful. It doesn't mean we have to get mean about these things. All too often we get rude. In fact, my daughter, one of my daughters is here tonight. She often, when there's an argument happening in the family, she'll say, "You're rude," and she'll give us kind of that look, and that's just not the way we need to be. We can disagree, and there are plenty of things we probably can disagree on if we take our time to talk about it, but we don't need to be disagreeable. We need to learn to have a conversation. We need to learn from each other to talk about what those differences are, but not to do so in a disagreeable manner. Finishing the quote from President Oaks, he says, "On the subject of public discourse, we should all follow the gospel teachings to love our neighbor and avoid contention. We should love all people, be good listeners, and show concern for their sincere beliefs. Though we may disagree, we should not be disagreeable." The last thing I'll add is that here in our community, we want to be happy, right? The gospel that I believe in, the gospel of Jesus Christ, is one of joy And I suspect regardless of your religious faith, we want to have joy in our life. So the goal here as we gather, as we have a meeting like this, as we talk about the importance of religious freedom, this should move us towards a happiness together, a place of peace and a place of joy. I'm excited for that. I'm excited to be part of this community, trying to reach this ideal of having joy as we share those differences and the similarities that we as a community share. Thank you for inviting me tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Boy, am I nervous. You said there's been nothing like that. That was wonderful from Dr. Camp. Thank you so much. The standing statement that stood out was, stop listening to hate-mongering voices, especially those who monetize from it. And there is nobody that has suffered from those than a Muslim. Now, it is my honor to present to you Mr. Suhail Khan. Suhail Khan is from Colorado, and he works with Microsoft Corporation as a Director of External Affairs. He is also a senior fellow at the Institute of Global Engagement, a Christian religious freedom think tank. Suhail is very active on Capitol Hill. Yes, we got one on the inside. And he worked with the Bush administration. So it's, again, my honor, ladies and gentlemen, to present to you Mr. Suhail Khan.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to be here and excited to be here in Culpeper. I especially want to thank Imam Shams and Pastor Dan for inviting me. I've been to Culpeper a few times, and I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this gathering and to being with you for some time since Pastor Dan pulled me aside. We met through another friend of ours, Pastor Bob Roberts of Keller, Texas, just outside Dallas and Fort Worth, and we've become fast friends. Got to visit his church and meet with many of the parishioners there, and so just, again, grateful to be with you. What I thought I would do in my time with you is kind of share my story, particularly of my parents, how they came to the United States, why religious freedom was the real driving force for them. That'll build on what Dr. Smith and Dr. Camp have talked about in their personal experiences, and then how that has driven me now as an American to continue in that journey of really pursuing religious freedom, not only for myself and my community, but really for people all over the country and indeed all around the globe. So my parents immigrated to Wyoming, of all places, in the early 60s. And they were part of a tradition of, as Dr. Smith talked about, we've had religious freedom that we've had to fight for, and our founders really had to struggle to establish that because that was not the norm in other countries and other cultures. And really, through their scholarship and their vision, imperfect as it might be, particularly in practice, they were able to enshrine in our founding documents, particularly in our U.S. Constitution, the vision of religious freedom. Indeed, it's right there in our First Amendment. And we're about to celebrate our 250th anniversary of our country, and one of the major parts of that celebration will be those founding documents. My parents were part of that tradition in that even before the founding of our country, there was a Muslim component. There were Muslims here in the United States. Indeed, estimates vary, but about 11 to 20% of the slaves that were brought here from Africa were practicing Muslims. And if any of you have read the book Roots by Alex Haley or saw the miniseries, you'll remember the main character, Kunta Kinte, who was brought here at age 16 from West Africa, what's modern-day Ghana. He was a member of the Moro tribe, and he was brought to Annapolis, just not too far from here as a slave. He was a practicing Muslim, and there in the movie or the book, if you read it, you find that he was forced to change his name from Kunta Kinte to Toby and forced to renounce his religion and accept the Christian faith. And there were many slaves who were in that situation. A few of them actually were able to preserve their Islamic tradition and to continue to practice their Islamic faith, either openly or in many cases privately. And there are even instances of some of those early Muslims who were able to, because they were literate, were able to raise their own funds when they had masters who would allow them to do other professions while they were in fact enslaved, to raise money. And over time, there were even some who were able to raise enough funds to buy and purchase their freedom. And there was even one that was famously went and visited at the invitation of President John Adams, visited the White House, and he was able to first raise the money to purchase his freedom, and then to raise enough money to subsequently travel back home to Africa. But that was the first wave and inclusion of Muslims here in the United States. And at that time, as Dr. Smith so beautifully articulated, there was a vision from our founders that while the country did not have a large number of Muslims, that whether other religious Muslims, whether they were Jewish or Muslim, that they enshrined in the documents through their very hearty debates that there could be a time when there would be what they call Mohammedans, what we call Muslims, Papists, what they call Catholics, who could become Americans. And they had debates about it. Some said that you couldn't, but they indeed said, look, as Dr. Smith so ably articulated, they envisioned that there would be a time where not only could they be citizens, but they could seek and secure elected office. And so they had that foresight of that inclusion of religious minorities. And as a matter of fact, I was just in Morocco a couple weeks ago, and the Moroccans will be the first to remind you that the first country to recognize the United States was indeed Morocco, a Muslim country. And the letters that were exchanged between the leaders of Morocco and our early founders, including their discussions about religion, are fascinating. The second wave of immigration is kind of what we think about when we think about immigration, and that was that wave of immigrants who came primarily from Europe, but also from Africa and the Middle East at the turn of the 19th century. Those are the people that came through Ellis Island. So you often think about Russian, Italian, Irish immigrants, people mostly from Europe. But with that, you had a lot of immigrants, both Christian and Muslim, coming from what was then called the Levant, Syria and Lebanon. And these people were coming here willingly, as willing immigrants, coming here to start farms and to start businesses. And they mostly settled in places like Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Michigan, Ohio. And so even now to this day, you have large communities in those areas of Muslims. They were Lebanese, Syrian, Arabic speaking, but they were both Christian and Muslim. As a matter of fact, the oldest existing mosque is in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, primarily Lebanese immigrants. And if you go there, even though it's a mosque, a good 40+% of the people that come to that mosque are Christian because they've married Muslims. And so their families are blended Christian and Muslim families. And the old joke there is, if you're a teenager or a young man or woman and you brought home somebody else that you're interested in marrying, the first question the parents would ask, are they Lebanese? And then they would ask, are they Christian or are they Muslim? Because there, the tradition was much more Lebanese focused. And that mosque still exists to this day. It's about 100 years old. It's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Although the first mosque that it was known to have been established was actually in North Dakota, also by Syrian immigrants. That mosque fell out of disuse and has been restored as kind of a memorial now by the descendants of those early Muslims who indeed just recently did not even know that they were Muslim. They just kind of rediscovered their Muslim roots, which actually comes back to the Africans. Many of the African Americans who have embraced Islam, you think about people like Malcolm X or Muhammad Ali, often call themselves reverts for the very reason that I described, in that they see that they are reverting back to their original religion, given that many of their ancestors were indeed Muslim. And so you see that tradition in the Islamic faith, in the American history and in the Islamic community. So the first wave was those enslaved Africans. Second wave was those that came here at the turn of the century. And that continued through the 50s and 60s, including with my parents. My parents immigrated, as I said, to Wyoming in the early 60s, primarily seeking economic opportunity, but a big part of it was religious freedom. My dad particularly tells the story that he was born in 1939. He was from a large family. He was in the middle of 7 children. His father had an 8th grade education, ran a small tobacco shop in southern India. His mother had no education. And the expectation was as soon as you turned 12 or 13 that you would begin working to support the family. He had what his family described as the temerity to want to finish high school. And he finished high school, and then he had the temerity and the audacity to say, I want to go to college. And his parents were very much against that. You have to realize that this was in a home with no running water, no electricity. He had to study by a kerosene lamp. As a matter of fact, one time he said he fell asleep because after his chores when he was studying, the kerosene lamp he had fallen asleep and it tipped over and it lit his hair on fire. So these are very, very crude and very poor circumstances, but he had a love for education, particularly for science. So Dr. Camp would like to know about that. And he wanted to study physics and then eventually nuclear physics. And when he was trying to study, he was getting discriminated against by the very rigid caste system that existed at the time in India and continues to persist, unfortunately, in India. And not only was there a caste system, but there was active discrimination against religious minorities in India, including Muslims, Christians, and other religious minorities. And so he was not getting opportunities to study in the classroom. And so he began to hear that there were other universities and colleges around the globe. He traveled to Bombay by himself to take a test to win a scholarship for the University of Moscow. This was at the height of the Cold War. And of all of India, he was the only winner to get that scholarship. He was excited to go, and his father told him, look, I've always been against this whole idea of education, but I've entertained your idea of getting a high school diploma. But if you want to study more, I refuse to allow you to go to Moscow because that is a communist country that does not worship God. And so my father, being an obedient son, ultimately acquiesced. But he said, Suhail, it was like winning the lottery, getting that golden ticket and having to, give it away. But the following year, by God's grace, he was awarded a scholarship to the University of Wyoming in Laramie. And actually, it was a Jewish professor who sponsored him and to study physics. And his father said to him again, I don't like this idea of education, but I do know that America is a place that respects God and it has a tradition of religious worship, and so I'll allow you to go. And so that's what brought my father to Wyoming in 1965, and he was able to subsequently get a Ph.D., Dr. Camp should know, in physics, and to first work in our aerospace industry. This was, again, the 60s. Aerospace, President Kennedy and then President Nixon were really pushing us to go to space, which we ultimately did to the moon in 1969. And my father was very inspired by that. But really what brought him here was the idea that he could practice his faith. And he indeed found that when he came to the United States, there weren't many Muslims. So he said he would tell me, Suhail, I would go to small towns around Wyoming and then later on to Colorado, where I was born, and look up in the white pages. The younger folks here won't even know what that is, and look for names that sounded Muslim or sounded Arab or sounded, and he would call them up and introduce himself, and then he would start to kind of string communities together. Eventually, with other Muslims, they established what they called the Muslim Student Association that was founded in Illinois, and later on they established larger national organizations. They also eventually linked up with the African American Muslim community that was primarily in larger cities like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., to really start to bring together a national community of American Muslims. The last immigrant wave is what you heard from Imam Shams, and those are people that came here as refugees, people that came here primarily in the 70s and 80s, refugees from Africa during the Balkan War, many refugees from Bosnia, and others who came here from Vietnam. I remember in 1975 when Saigon fell, my parents sponsored 2 families from Vietnam, and one of those families was Muslim. So they were that way, and that wave continues. And now we deal with some of the political repercussions of those waves of immigration. But those are kind of the 3 waves that have brought this country, have brought Islam to this country in different ways, different fashions. Of course, each person has their own story. Right now, as our country continues to prosper and grow, we have about 6 to 8 million Muslims in the country. That's what most demographers put that number. And they're all over the country, but of course predominantly in places like New York, Michigan, again, because of those Lebanese farmers and others that came there. They eventually began working in the Dearborn, the Ford factory in Dearborn, Michigan, and that's why you see large pockets of Muslim, particularly Arab Americans there, both, again, Christian and Muslim in places like Michigan, Toledo, Ohio. But now you see that there are huge Muslim populations in places like Houston, Texas, in Florida, and all over the country. Where this has really hit me personally is, again, this was something that was very personal to me, to my family, my parents, and then when they became Americans, they continued that tradition, trying to work with in growing the Muslim American community, but that meant also working with the Christian churches in the neighborhood, the Jewish synagogues, working with faith leaders, because they felt that the country was one that was made stronger by religious voices, and they wanted to be part of that. So the old joke in our family was that when again, I'm the oldest of 5 children, when I was old enough to go to high school, I got into public school for elementary school. My parents weren't crazy about public schools and what was happening there when it came to kind of secularization and kind of anti-religious sentiment. And so while there were no Muslim schools at the time, so they said, let's send Suhail to a Catholic school. So I went to Catholic school, and the joke in our family was every good Muslim kid has to go to Catholic school. So I was very comfortable in the Catholic Church, and my eyes were really open when I went to my first Baptist church. I said, gosh, you guys sing, and there's music. What's going on here? Very different. But that was something that, again, my parents felt very comfortable. I remember a story. Growing up in Colorado, my parents, I was a baby, and my parents were going to Vail Pass, and now it's kind of known as a fancy resort, but in the early 70s, it was kind of a little more of an outpost, and my parents' car got stuck in the snow, and there was a big snowstorm, and so they went in, they were looking for a place where they could get some help, and they saw a house that had a cross, and so they went and knocked on the door, and I still marvel at the story, and the family there said, well, come on in, and they ended up spending the night there. Perfect strangers, and my mom and dad and this little baby came in and spent the night at this home, and the only reason why they felt that they could even have the courage to knock on the door was because they had a cross on the door. So there was that sense of America is a Christian country, it is a country that respects religion, and even though it predominantly is made up of Christians, it is one that welcomes people of other faiths, and that was very much their experience. When I decided to pursue my professional career, I had no interest in religious freedom per se, other than just practicing my own faith, but I had that sense from my parents and from my education that this was something important, but it was much more personal than a public one or let alone a professional one. When I came to Capitol Hill, now 31 years ago, to work for my hometown congressman, suddenly I realized I was the only Muslim staffer on Capitol Hill, and members of Congress would begin, including my boss, would begin asking me questions about Islam, about the teachings of Islam, and there were, of course, issues that were being considered on the House floor that related to Islam and Muslims. And so suddenly I was forced to kind of answer questions, even though it wasn't something that I was seeking to do. And I welcomed the opportunity. I also found that I had a profoundly inspiring personal story and that experience, and that was being a devout Muslim. I would pray when the time came for prayer, and during Ramadan I would fast. And the congressman I worked for, Tom Campbell, is a very strong and practicing Catholic, and so he was very much one who said, Suhail, don't worry about if you need to go pray, do what you got to do, and we won't have any staff meetings on Friday afternoon, because we know you have to go to your prayer service then, so don't worry that you're going to miss out. So he was very encouraging and very accommodating to me. Eventually, other staffers began to come to Capitol Hill that were Muslim, and they would hear about me and meet me, most of them Democrats, but I didn't mind. And we began praying together, first in my boss's office and then in different committee rooms and things. And then we grew to a group of about 12 or 13 where instead of carpooling to the local mosque for the Friday prayers, one of the other staffers, I get the credit for this, but it wasn't my idea. This is 1996, 1997. They said, look, why don't we have our Friday prayers together somewhere in the Capitol? And for those of you who don't know, all the space in the U.S. Capitol on the House side is controlled by the Speaker of the House. And so, as the only Republican staffer, I was assigned the responsibility to go to the Speaker to ask if we could secure a temporary space every Friday for about an hour where we could gather to pray. The Speaker then was Newt Gingrich, and I found time to go to him at an event. And I thought, like anything in politics, it would be a campaign. It would take months, years. I'd have to get other members of Congress to maybe write some letters, pull them aside, and it would take some time. The chaplain of the House invited us to pray in the chapel, I should point out. But unfortunately, as the Christians know, the chapel has pews, and Muslims need, to put down rugs to pray on the ground. And so the pews prohibited us from physically being able to pray in that church, even though we would have loved to. It's a very beautiful little chapel there, right in the Capitol, which again goes to Dr. Smith's narrative about how even though there is a wall of separation between church and state, our First Amendment, the other part of the First Amendment, encourages us to have the freedom of speech to talk and to profess and to act out our religion, which is also something that we shouldn't forget. And so I went to the Speaker, and rather than having to have a lengthy campaign, he said, how many people do you have? I said, we have about 15 or 16. He said, how much time do you need? I said, we need about an hour every Friday. He said, as long as I'm Speaker, I'll guarantee you and your Muslim colleagues will have a place to pray. And we were able to continue that prayer. That prayer has grown over the years to over 150 congregants, now members of Congress. Capitol Hill Police will be right there with their sidearms praying. And even through different subsequent speakers, Speaker Denny Hastert, Nancy Pelosi, John Boehner, Paul Ryan, that tradition has continued. And I always, a reporter once asked me, is this just a matter of convenience for you, that rather than having to go to the mosque, you can just go to a building next door and pray? And I said, no, it has nothing to do with convenience, because personally, I would have rather gone to a mosque, because I like to have the whole trappings of going to a mosque rather than a meeting room in the U.S. Capitol. But it is important to me as an American that at that time I used to live right by the Capitol, that when I would walk past the Capitol, it's not just a beautiful monument to a historical legacy of freedom and the freedom of religion, but it's a practical, living embodiment of what's enshrined in our Constitution. And that prayer, I should say, even after tragedy, has continued in the U.S. Capitol by the staffers. I left the Hill in 1999, but those Muslim American staffers and members of Congress have continued that tradition there. So that is a personal example of just, again, what's in. And now, funny enough, the U.S. State Department brings visitors from other countries to show off that prayer service, to say, see, even for our Muslim minority, we have a prayer service, including in the U.S. Capitol. I subsequently, when I left the Hill, went to go work for President Bush, and funny enough, and this is only in America, my main responsibility was doing outreach to the evangelical Christian community and the Catholic community, because that's where the president really wanted to focus his outreach. I also did outreach to the Muslim American community. The Muslim American community at that time supported George W. overwhelmingly. Almost 80% of Muslim Americans at that time in the 2000 elections voted for George W. For those of you guys who lived through that crazy election, you remember he won with 521 votes in Florida after going to the Supreme Court. And so it was a razor-thin election. And at the time, political leaders in the White House would say it was evangelicals and Muslims who got us here. Very openly embracing. And then of course, we have the tragedy of 9/11. I was in the White House for that day, and I have to say, initially, people embraced me personally and their Muslim neighbors. As a matter of fact, if you remember, President Bush visited a mosque in Washington, D.C. He was the first sitting U.S. president to ever visit a mosque, to remind our fellow Americans that, yes, we need to go after those that did us harm in New York, and in Virginia, at the Pentagon, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But those are not our friends and neighbors. Those are not fellow Americans who might be practicing their Muslim religion, but that they're a separate enemy. And he particularly had a sense of what had happened to Japanese Americans when they were interned during World War II, and other community, Germans and Italian Americans, who unfortunately throughout our history were persecuted because of their ethnic, religious, or racial association with an enemy thousands of miles away. 9/11 was no different. But then, as was already said by Dr. Camp, there were instances of hate and discrimination against not only Muslims, but even people who looked like Muslims. In fact, the first victims of hate after 9/11 were two Sikh gentlemen who were murdered in Arizona because the perpetrators thought that they were Muslim because they wore a turban. And we saw that there was not only hate crimes, but there was legislation. And while that was a very ugly period, and I was subject to a lot of those attacks, I had an FBI agent who was assigned to me to protect me for years because I was continually receiving very ugly personal threats. I never for a second doubted the inclusion and the vision of not only the American founders, but the American people at that time and continuing to this day, that we would rise above those isolated voices of hatred, of violence, of bigotry, and that we would embrace our fellow Americans, as we have throughout our history for different communities who have been persecuted at various times of our history, whether they be Jewish, Catholic, Japanese American, African American, etc. And so I always tell people, and then I'll end on this note, through my time with IGE, the Institute for Global Engagement, when I joined them, even despite them being a Christian think tank, and they came to me after I left George W. Bush and said, look, we're an evangelical Christian think tank. We start every morning with devotions. Pastor Bob Roberts, who I mentioned, was part of the organization back then. He now heads it. And they said, we expressly do not hire any non-evangelical Christians, never mind Catholics or LDS or Jewish folks, but we, as a board, came together and said, we want to hire you if you will come and work for us as a Muslim. And I said, absolutely. And I served there for 2 years, got to travel the world, not to talk about Islam or Christianity per se. My Muslim friends were afraid, are you going to go proselytize on behalf of Christians? No. And my Christian friends were like, why is there a Muslim on the payroll at a Christian organization? What's going on here? Because I eventually would lead those devotions. Because again, I went to Catholic school, so I know the Bible inside and out. I always lean on John 4. Everybody wants to go to Matthew 5:9, the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers, which is great. But I prefer John 4, because that's where Jesus met with the Samaritan woman at the well in front of his disciples. And even though the Samaritan woman wasn't exactly living a righteous life, he still treated her with respect, and that's all I asked for. I was going around the globe to the Middle East, to Africa, to Asia, to talk about religious freedom, and it was that much more powerful as a religious minority in the United States, particularly after 9/11, and that's why I shared some of the unfortunate experiences after 9/11 for the Muslim American community, including for myself, to talk about how, as imperfect as we are as the American people, that our founders enshrined in those important documents a vision of religious freedom, and that I ask our Chinese communist interlocutors or our Arab and Muslim leaders in the Middle East or in Africa, or even our secular friends in Europe, look to the United States, learn from both our example, good and bad, and hopefully you will realize that religious freedom is a bedrock principle, not an American principle, but a universal principle that was endowed by our Creator, whether you believe in one of the monotheistic faiths or other faiths or no faith at all, that it is something that is bedrock. And even to a hardened communist, we will make the argument that religious freedom will promote stability and harmony in your society rather than trying to squelch that human instinct to worship the divine. Let it flourish. Let it be out in the open, and you will have a much more peaceful society than one if you try to push it into the recesses and hidden corners of the society, where it can, if you do that, often grow into one that becomes disloyal or even violent. And that's a very difficult case to often make, but we've had so much success even with some of the biggest and greatest persecutors of religious minorities around the globe, and having that very earnest and forthright conversation and championing. And again, also recognizing the faults and mistakes that we've made as humans, as Americans throughout our history. You know, Churchill always said you can count on the Americans do the right thing after they've exhausted all other possibilities. And that is the American experience. But the good news is we do eventually get it right. And we have a blueprint in our founding documents. And I can tell you, as a proud American and a proud Muslim American, that has very much been my personal experience, and I'm honored, proud to be with you to share some of those experiences. I look forward to our conversation. Thank you so much. Yeah. That mic works. So this is the Phil Donahue / Oprah Winfrey portion of the program. All references the younger folks are not going to remember.
And those of us who's coming from a
That's right, from a different
maybe.
country. Well, we're going to get into that. So Imam Shams, first, in the introduction, you had obviously talked about that you are the imam here in Culpeper, Virginia. But what we didn't talk about is really kind of some of your background. I understand you've been here for about 5 years. You're originally from Afghanistan. Afghanistan is no stranger to conflict. What brought you from a war-torn country like Afghanistan to Culpeper, Virginia? What's your personal story?
So there is a little bit of background, so bear with me. I was born during the civil unrest of Afghanistan, and as a result, my parents had to immigrate to Pakistan. We were refugees there, and luckily we did not have a problem. Afghans as a whole did not have a problem to pursue education and to have their lives settled, those who wanted. So luckily I got educated, but overall the life of a refugee isn't a fun life, especially living in what we call a third world country, you know. So in early 2020s, in the decade around 2011, 2012, I returned back to my home country, Afghanistan, and I eventually started working with the USAID, the Aid Agency for International Development, as a program management assistant, totally different than what I am doing right now. And I get to learn a lot about America. I get to meet a lot of great people, foreign service officers and contractors and our people in the military. And as a result of my association with the U.S. federal government, we were always the target of violence. They were thinking of us as some kind of spies in the country, while the reality was that we were rebuilding Afghanistan with our American counterparts. So we always had an opportunity as part of a U.S. government program of protecting allies. I got an opportunity to come to the U.S. in 2020, February 2020, just before the COVID. I was welcomed with COVID. Thank you, America. Initially, I was very skeptical on coming to the United States. Obvious reasons, family ties, culture, history. Eventually, I got settled in Afghanistan and a handsome paycheck. So my hesitation was I didn't know if I will fit in this community, in a different community, whether my religion, will I be able to practice my religion, especially hearing all those negative things, as Dr. Kemp said, all those negative things were coming on the media. I didn't know, but then there was a potential prospect of economic growth and personal well-being in my family. A Palestinian American friend who was on a contract in Afghanistan gave me a very profound advice, told me to connect with your local mosque, and people are great, you will be fine. It will be all right. And I took that advice, and the problems that, like many Afghans, they were getting persecuted. The internal displacement was happening because of their association with the U.S. government. I eventually came to the United States. All my worries were wrong. I got sponsored by a resettlement agency in Hyattsville, Maryland. Their associated church helped me. They furnished my house before I got here. The resettlement agency rent me a house. And I met those amazing volunteers who, for the sake of this very idea that I'm sitting in front of you, helped me. And I'm always very grateful and appreciative. And then about 5 years ago, I got an opportunity. I got a job offer here at Islamic Center of Culpeper as a preacher. This was basically going back to my ancestral line of work. I had some experience as well, some education as a preacher. So I accepted that position here about 4 or 5 years ago and moved to Culpeper. And only after I visited the town first, fell in love with the town, fell in love with the people, and the rest is history. I'm in front of you now. I connect with people, try to connect with people, try to connect people with people. This is the example, and try to connect people with God in a different way, the correct way. I'm joking. I had to pull that joke. And you might have witnessed, we had some open house events. We invited our neighbors. So this is pretty much my background, and now I'm in front of you.
So you answered my other questions. I was going to ask you why you chose Culpeper, but you answered that. But tell me, maybe a little more personally, how did you, when you got connected with Pastor Dan, why, as a practicing Muslim, particularly as an imam, why and how would you be partnered with a Baptist pastor?
Well, the short answer is he showered me with love. He met with me, came to my mosque. He showed me nothing but support and admiration. And look at him, who will not love this guy? This is an amazing guy.
Well, thank you. Anything else that I missed that you'd like to share?
Well, I wanted to give a little bit of, shed a little bit of light on the role of people in Culpeper, since we are talking about Culpeper, religious liberty. Some of you, when I came here, we had an open house under the title of Meet Your Muslim Neighbors. And that event, despite our, anticipation that we might not have that many people, when we invited people, over 250 people show up. A lot of love and support was shown to us. That event was a huge success in an unprecedented way. We met with our wider communities. We met with our, that's where we're, when I get a chance to meet people from different faiths and especially the leadership, the clericals. That love and that support was an amazing thing for me, to push me to my limits, to push me to understand this topic of religious, freedom of expression, and then to try to help and reach out through that to my community. And then eventually maybe we will help us people around the world as well. But this love and this support wasn't the first time. that we have been, shown. As some of you might be aware, before we started the construction of our mosque, we ran into some problems with regards to certain permits with the Culpeper County. And later we found out that as a result of that, people have sent hundreds of letters to the county, some even to the town of Culpeper, thinking that it's under their jurisdiction. People raised their voices in the public hearings, in public meetings. And this gave me a lot of hope, because I'm coming from a different background and I had all those skepticals. And this is something that really, really made me happy. So in the context of religious liberty, this support and love that was shown on the day of groundbreaking, after eventual support from the people of Culpeper and some advocates from D.C., we had to go to the court, unfortunately. After we got that permit and we were breaking our ground, uninvited, there wasn't an open invite, over 200 people show up for that groundbreaking ceremony, and that was just amazing when I think about it, and I will always be appreciative of that from the bottom of my heart.
Well, thank you, Imam Shams. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you both. Thank you. We're going to call a little bit of an audible from our original plan, and I'd like to invite the 4 panelists who haven't been up here yet to come on up, and we'll do this all together. We'll introduce each of you as you come up as I find a chair backstage. You can always bank on a high schooler leaving a chair in the wrong place. Need one more? I bet you I got 2 back there. No, ma'am. There you go, Dr. Shoup. I got one more back here. I want to talk a little bit about, introduce you to each of our panelists here. They can say their names and just quick background. We've got about 15 minutes, then we've got a hard out for the call to prayer for our Muslim brothers and sisters. So take a minute to introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Daniel Jean. I have a family. I'm married with a wife and 2 children, and one is in the way. By profession, I'm a civil engineer and work in the private sector.
Hold on, and you're a Haitian immigrant.
Oh, yes, that's correct.
And you currently practice the LDS Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, correct?
Correct, yes.
Wonderful.
Hello, good evening. My name is Fallon Duff, and I live here in the Culpeper community. I'm a mom. I have 5 amazing little children, and my husband and I have lived in this community for about 5 years. And I currently serve as a Stake Relief Society president for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My personal congregation is here in Culpeper, but in my role, I represent the women of our entire region. There's about 1,200 of us in this area, and we primarily focus on building women and families and focusing on our Savior Jesus Christ, strengthening their testimonies. We believe that family is central to God's plan, and that we focus so much on strengthening the family unit, that if we strengthen families, that we can strengthen communities. And another big mission statement for us is that our motto is charity never faileth. And so we do a lot of work with humanitarian work in the area. In the LDS faith in the state of Virginia has helped immensely with relocating those from other countries, refugees, and getting back up on their feet.
All right. Khadijah?
Hi, my name's Khadijah. I'm a mom. I reverted to Islam in 2024 from atheism. I'm a full-time student in cultural anthropology and political science. And that's about it.
Hello, my name is Gabriela Ogden. I'm originally from Argentina. I moved to this country 32 years ago after me and my husband, while he was serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother too, and I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ. Sister Duff, I help with the Spanish ward in our communities, in our ward. We just help the members in our community, the Hispanic community, to come closer to Christ, and I'm part of the presidency in our ward. And we love to bring the light of Christ to those around us. And so, yeah.
Dr. Shoup.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Julie Shoup, Dr. Shoup, because I just got my Ph.D. And I am a teacher at this very school right here. And I'm actually here because I'm in an interfaith marriage with the person who's filming me from the back right now. I am Christian, and my husband is Muslim, and we have 3 kids. I'm here to talk about that.
So, Julie, hold on to that microphone, because I'd love for you to talk to us about that religious liberty and how that works in your home, how that works in your life. You've got your husband's an actively practicing Muslim, and tell us about that.
Okay, so I grew up here in Virginia as a Presbyterian up in Warrenton. My husband was born and raised in Jordan, and was a practicing Muslim for his entire life. We met when we were both living and working in the United Arab Emirates, which is Dubai, Dubai. And at first, it was a very big learning experience for both of us, because we both came from a place of insulation. Like, I was used to people being pretty similar to me, and I'm sure he was used to people being pretty similar to him. So once we got over the learning curve of, oh, you do this for your holiday, oh, your book says that about this, prophet, we found out that there was a lot more similarities between the 2 religions that we were initially led to believe growing up. So now we have 3 kids, and we try to raise them with an open mind. So they went to the Warrenton Presbyterian Church preschool, but they also go to Arabic class at the mosque. They do Christmas with me and my family, but we also do Eid and Ramadan with his family. The kids really went out because they get all the holidays.
Gabrielle, tell us, grew up in Argentina as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, my whole life.
So religious minority, 90+% Catholic in Argentina, right? Here in the United States, still religious minority, but also come here as a Latina woman. Yeah. Tell us about your experience with that in both Argentina here and the United States, and how religious liberty fits into your life.
Yeah. So, like I said before, I grew up my first 19 years of my life. I was in Argentina, and I was always with the blessing of being able just to choose, right, to serve and just to worship God. And that was something, my whole life pretty much I was around that. And I have that blessing to be able just to choose to serve God in Argentina. My mom and my dad show us the way, and we're able just to embrace it and just be able just to have it part of our lives every day. Now moving forward many years later, I moved to the United States, and I was happy to come to the States. Of course, I didn't know anything about the culture, anything about the language, but I knew that coming to the United States, I will have a word family. I will have somewhere to go to church to, and we'll have the same beliefs. Of course, completely different language, because, if I wanted to learn the language, I had to go to an English word and try to, immerse myself to it. And we did from an early age with our kids. With my husband, we made the commitment to teach our children, right, to have God in their lives. That was the way that it was going to help them to go through life, through many trials. When we have God in our lives, life is better. If we can be able just to accomplish so much more. Of course, the problems will still be there, right? But we're going to be able just to have a different perspective. So we're able just to embrace that, and with our children, later on in life, they were able just to choose to serve missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and go and proclaim that truth to the world and be able to bring the light of Christ. Not everybody will accept it, but to them it's just something that it will just give the opportunity to those that needs that love.
Thank you. Khadijah, I want to play off of that idea of choice. No, to you, please. And being able to choose and find your path. Your father is Jewish, mother is Catholic, went to Catholic school Catholic...
I did First Holy Communion.
First Holy Communion. Okay, but you mentioned atheism and then a revert.
Yeah.
Give us the quick story about that and how religious freedom and your ability to choose.
So, we all have experiences as children, and those experiences pushed me away from religion. But the best part about religious freedom is the ability to continue to seek knowledge, regardless of your own beliefs, regardless of whether or not you have any at all, but to learn humans and human experiences, and that we're all human and we have similar experiences, and communicating vulnerably and authentically is something that's really, really important in order to connect.
Fallon, give us. I got about 4 minutes to get both your answers in here.
Okay.
But tell us how your values and traditions will preserve religious liberty. What's that?
Absolutely. As a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I have made a commitment to follow Jesus Christ. And something that I love about his teachings and about what he emulates is that he meets people where they are. And Suhain told a beautiful story tonight about the woman at the well. And I think of the woman at the well. I think of the woman caught in adultery. I think of the woman with the issue of blood. These were women that, according to societal times, they were outcasts, right? Jesus had no reason to talk to these people, but he did. He got down to their level and he met them where they were, but he didn't leave them there. He lifted them and he raised them and he made them and he brought them better than they were. He left them better than they were. And I hope that as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a follower of Jesus Christ, that I can emulate even a fraction of that I can love people no matter of their race, their religion, their background, where they're going, where they came from, and that I can love them and value them for who they are.
Now, Daniel, you grew up in Haiti.
Yeah.
And in your home, 5 different religions?
Well, in my immediate family, there are 8 of us, 5 kids, my mom, and my 2 grandparents. And each of them had a different religion.
Wow. And so tell me how that impacted you and your ability to find your walk in faith and how you see the world.
Well, every Sunday, typically we go to church on Sunday. Every Sunday I would have the opportunity to choose who I would go to church with and to visit at different churches. But until the time it was time for me to decide, because I was the only one who didn't really have a religion, so I kind of benefited from everybody else in my house because I was the youngest of the family. But once it was time for me to decide, and I was mature enough to make a decision, and my oldest brother, who is an LDS, he was a member of the church at the time, and I used to go to church with him. I would go to church with him, and then I decided to incorporate faith and then find myself to belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So to me, finding a balance between religion and in my worldly life, I think of, to me, religion it's part of who I am, and I think of it being building character, because although at the time I took that for granted, and looking back now, I was not forced to join any of those religions, any of those churches that each member of my family practiced at the time. But I had the opportunity to choose and decide on my own and develop that character. So my faith reflects on everything that I do on a daily basis, and losing that ability, losing that chance or that privilege to become, to exercise my religion, and building that character would be a big part of me that would be missed.
Thank you. Thank you all. And I'm going to invite Shams and Dan back up. Please, you stay right here. Let's give a big round of applause for our panel. I really want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and encourage you to kind of break out of your normal groups. Join us in the library, and as we mingle together, and also we could observe our Muslim friends as they answer the call to prayer in the studio. You'll be able to see that. Please feel free to go into the studio with them if you'd like to be closer. There are chairs and room to stand.
We asked you when you came in to give us your name and your email address. We're not trying to make you Baptist, but we did record this event tonight. We'd love to send an email link to you if you'd like to watch it and share it with friends. We'll also be doing some other religious liberty events. We tried really hard to be as expansive as we could tonight. We know there's more that we need to do, so we'd love to tell you about some additional things we're going to do later this year, bringing small groups together and some larger groups together.
Thank you so much for coming. Today you have an opportunity to see how Muslims pray. This will be our third prayer of the day. We have 5 daily prayers. I know. So after we had some discussions in the library. Just across the library, there's a studio that Bishop of Dr. Sadahom has gracefully allowed us to pray in. You will witness a call to prayer, and then a congregation, all of our congregation pray in a group. You will witness that. You are more than welcome to observe that. Come inside. There will be chairs around in the back. Once again, thank you so much for coming and joining us in this event, and looking forward to have many of such events in the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you know where we're headed, the library is this way. You can come down this hallway on this side, and you'll be able to see the library. It's the glassed-in room. And for those of you joining in prayer, the studio, you can see through the glass. It's glassed in as well. It's just on this side. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.